I've started the recording of the webinar now. So first of all, just a few general questions. So Ruth, AI is on everybody's agenda, it seems to me. I've got a shelf full of books on AI. I'm reading about AI in newspapers all the time. It's top of mind in a lot of areas. So what brought you into this whole interesting area of artificial intelligence?
So great question. So I think in my career, I've always worked with new technology. And when I say new technology, I mean stuff that didn't really exist. So I'm kind of been dealing with a lot of ambiguity. And when you say to people, people say, what do? You tell them, and it's not something they can relate because it's something they haven't seen before. And to give you an example, before coming over to start Yewno, the last job I did was working for BT, and it was the super fast broadband program. And people in the UK may remember that, but BT announced this huge £1.5 billion investment, and it was about 15 years ago when the economy wasn't doing well. And we said, we're rolling out this fiber-based infrastructure, and people said, why? Why are you doing that? Because at that time, all we were really doing was sending emails. And we said, well, we're going to need the infrastructure. It takes a long time to roll out, and you're going to want to watch, internet-enabled TV. You're going to be doing all of this IP-based stuff, multiplayer gaming, interactive things. And at the time, people didn't see it. And none of us saw the pandemic. None of us realized that there were going to be households with multiple people on multiple devices simultaneously. And even we didn't, of course, know that something like a pandemic was coming, but we knew that the foundation was really critical to enabling kind of the future economy and also people's personal interests. And so I've kind of dealt with that. And then when we started Yewno, it was, I saw the technology in, I think, 2013. And honestly, it was the first version of a knowledge graph. And many people on the call may use sort of mind mapping techniques and have seen knowledge graphs. And I actually didn't like them at school when we had them. And the first version, I saw it and I didn't like it. But I played with it for a while. And then I began to understand what it was doing. And it wasn't simply sort of mapping what it saw. It was understanding and inferring and creating these new things. And at that point, that kind of is what hooked me at that time onto kind of what AI could do for us in the future.
That's really interesting. So there's a real sense of novelty there and the opportunity of perhaps doing something a little bit different. So tell me now, so how does Yewno itself fit into that? What's the background to Yewno itself?
Yeah, so Yewno actually was founded based on PhD research at King's College London that started in 2009. And it was in applied mathematics, specifically in the field of econophysics. And econophysics aims to use, physical kind of and financial kind of information and restructure that using unstructured kind of physics mathematical models. And if you take yourselves back to 2009, and if everybody on this call thinks about 2009, so, 12 years ago, of all content, about 10% is a numeric and about 90% is unstructured text. And if you think about what was happening 12 years ago, people like bankers, hedge funds were taking data feeds every night, and they were basing all of their models, all of their calculations, all of their forecasts and predictions on that data. And that was at best 10% of data. And if you consider that most people didn't buy all of the data, they bought some of it. So it was a subset of 10% of data. And then you say, well, how much better could that modeling, could that forecasting be if you were able to take the 90% of unstructured text? So of course, at that time, machines couldn't read unstructured text. So the research was all about taking that unstructured text, turning it into maths so that machines could read it. And if you think about something like the subprime mortgage crisis, and I'm sure we've all marveled at that and how no one spotted it earlier. But again, if you're only taking financial feeds, if you're not reading local newspapers and you're not reading about distress in the housing market, you can see how those things have happened. So incredibly valuable to be able to obviously teach a computer to read a book or any kind of text. So that's kind of how it started. And then the next phase of the research, basically we wanted to prove it not just with kind of financial and economic data, but also with other types. So moving into sort of the biomedical sphere and reading scientific literature. And again, complex systems. And at that point, that was when Mike Keller from Stanford saw the technology. And he said, I don't think your technology is only biomedical. He said, I think you could use it across all domains of information. And he said, at Stanford, I've always had this dream of an interdisciplinary kind of inference engine based on concepts, based on ideas, not just words. And I think from a sort of technology point of view, it's incredibly challenging and therefore interesting to read across not just one field of content. So you see a lot of people in AI and they'll be working on one domain, maybe science or maybe finance or maybe fiction or whatever, but to read across. And I think, I'd be interested to see the questions from people on the call, but we think the great discovery in the future will come from the intersection of domains. And it's very difficult in a traditional environment to get that, because when you put in a query in a traditional format, you narrow by definition your query to that source. Whereas in a knowledge graph in an AI type environment, you can make those connections that no one would ever have thought of in the past.
That's really, so we've got a mix here of huge amounts of data, interdisciplinary data in lots of different fields, and that notion of unstructuredness, which is, I don't want to say it's a challenge exactly to libraries, but libraries have been very much about structured data and metadata. So we've got a really interesting environment here, unstructured data, lots of it, making inferences that. I'm going to come back and ask you about knowledge graph in a moment as one of the components, because I sometimes struggle with what that means. But what I want first, I just want to ask a sort of general thing about AI. AI means lots of different things. There's the science fiction general AI where it's superhuman, going to take over the world. When you're thinking about AI, what are you thinking about? What kind of AI, if you like, are you working with?
Yes, AI is an incredibly broad field, and I've been asked that question before, and I have a slide with sort of an AI sort of word chart, and it has, I think nearly 100 words. So you could be talking about sort of robotics, machine learning, deep learning, all kinds of different things, and they are all in fact AI. So it's a bit like saying medicine, and you could be a chiropractor or a gynecologist or any kind of other surgeon, and you work in the field of medicine, but what you do is distinctly different from what those other people do. So I think in terms of what we specifically do, we specifically work in the fields of knowledge graphs, machine learning, and computational semantics. And that's kind of where we go deep. But there are so many other things that other people are doing with AI that, are also completely amazing.
Right. And I wonder, that's interesting. I want to pick up on that and think about, you talked about discovery of information and what are the problems that you're trying to solve with AI. I mean, we've seen people in just working on chatbots and learning analytics, but the focus of what you're doing, you say, is this unstructured content. It's around what we might call discovery, and that intrigues me because, as you probably know, CILIP, the Information Professionals Organisation in the UK, did a report earlier on this year where they thought that discovery was the key area in terms of libraries and AI. So tell me expand on that a little bit. What are the problems you're trying to solve, and why not other areas, if you like?
Yeah, so I think AI, as you said, it's this huge field and there can be so many different things going on. And so specifically in terms of what we do, I do agree that discovery is this huge opportunity. And you have to say, well, what is the problem we face every day? We're overwhelmed every day by, mostly now by email. We still get a bit of postal mail. Then we're getting all kinds of other notifications. And so the amount of content that we're sent is produced and isn't necessarily the best content. And if you think about the background, there's all of the content that exists that's already digitized. Then there's still loads of content that hasn't yet been digitized, but hopefully will be in the future. And then there's all new content on a forward-looking basis, and every day there's, new blogs, new news sources, etc. So I think the problem that we all face is simply the volume of information. So as humans, we can all read, but we can all read to a certain amount depending on, how much time we've got available. And, there's simply no way that you can actually necessarily find the best things in the amount of time as a human that you've got. So what I think kind of the main benefit of all of this sort of AI-based machine learning type tool is that machines do have this infinite capacity. We use Amazon Web Services, there are other cloud platforms, but what's happened in the past couple of decades in terms of the cost of those kind of computing and that availability of computing has really, changed what's possible. So you can literally ingest these unlimited amounts of content, millions and millions of items on a daily basis, and then a machine can digest them and read them. And the other thing I like about the machine approach, when you consider traditional approaches, all content has historically been hopefully indexed to a greater or lesser extent, and that indexing is inconsistent. So at best, you're dealing with inconsistent indexing, and you may also be encountering other problems such as bias, because of the person who indexed it at the time, etc. But it means that all information isn't being surfaced consistently in existing tools. And I think AI can help overcome that by reading everything algorithmically in exactly the same way.
So again, we've got this coincidence, haven't we, of huge amounts of data, which has been seen as, there was lots of debate about information overload, and then I forget who said it's not an information overload problem, it's a filtering problem. So what you're able to do then is to manage, I don't know if manage is the right word, but you can deal with huge amounts of information. The technology is shifted to enable you to do that at, if you like, realistic cost. That's the background. So I wonder, I'm coming back to this knowledge graph. There's some concepts, there's some words that you use, and you've talked already about concepts, and I know that vast array of content is sometimes called the corpus. So guide us through a couple of the key elements of your approach.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is kind of what AI can now do in terms of neural network models. So as you kind of go back, if we go back through the past 20 years, obviously, you know, the internet, the digitalization of content was a major step forward. When I was a student, when I was at university, I went to the library, I took out books, I read my books. I did not have the internet in my room. So that's like literally this sea shift. And, you know, sometimes you can forget actually how fast that's happened. And then if you look at where we are today, now you go sort of to a search bar, you put in a search term, you get 1.8 million answers. So on the one hand, amazing, because I would never have found that when I was wandering through the library myself, but on the other hand, totally unmanageable. So within that 1.8 million list, you'd get a load of sort of things that actually weren't relevant. So what technology was doing up until about sort of 7 years ago was sort of NLP. So it was hunting for keywords. You said these are all the words.
NLP is?
Natural language programming.
Right,
so
thanks.
Basically, looking for words in text. And that was, I'm not putting it, I'm not saying it's bad. It definitely was a step in the right direction. But what now happens with neural networks is they're not just reading through the text and hunting for words, they're actually understanding the context and meaning. So if I read a piece of text and I see the word jaguar, I've read the surrounding text. Sorry, when I say I, if an algorithm has read the text and it's read the word jaguar, it's understood from the surrounding text. Is it jaguar the cat? Is it jaguar the car? Is it jaguar the World War II tank, etc.? And it can therefore, you know, give you an accurate result. So somebody's searching for something, you know, and if you're searching for depression, are you searching for an economic depression, or, you know, a chronic affective depression, or physiological or psychological, etc.? So it can understand, and it can then give you the correct list of results. So by that, you know, helping somebody not just get this enormous unmanageable list. So I think the use of concepts and the ability of AI to just actually understand the context is huge.
That's interesting, and I take from that you know, I know, because I've seen Yewno, as I mentioned at Derby, and it's very visual. But it's not just about being visual, is it? Then it's understanding, as you say, that those concepts and presenting them, you know, those relationships. Because we've seen visualizations of stuff for a long time, but that's not it, is it? It's much more than that, as you say.
No, you're completely right. So I think when you see a visualization, people are normally drawn to it. Because as humans, we are drawn to something that's more interesting to look at. But you need to understand, is it simply a visualization of a database? So is it literally the same data that's been visualized? Or is it in fact supported by underlying technology like a knowledge graph, which is constantly reading and updating? So every kind of term, if a new version of that term or word comes in, it will be updated, it will be linked. Does it also hold the connections? So it's not just about showing you that X and Y are connected. A knowledge graph holds all of the information about that connection and why those things are connected. And if you want to understand why two things are connected, you can interrogate the knowledge graph and you can get to the exact sections of the supporting literature. And that's a critical thing. So a lot of work has happened over the past, you know, few years around visualization, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the visualization is one part of it, but it's actually the supporting technology, the knowledge graph technology, that actually understands the text, has read the text, and then can then take the researcher back to the exact section of text and also explain why that connection is there.
Right, that's very helpful. Yeah, I can see now why it's called a knowledge graph, that it's mapping things in that sort of way. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, all this really about this huge amount of content. In the library world, we're used to having all that published content, and we've got discovery services that index that content and so on. But how do you manage to get the content providers to work with you? Do you have to pay them? I mean, or how do you get them? Do people suggest things? How do you get things into your corpus, so to speak?
So when we founded Yewno in 2015, we had the algorithmic technology, which goes back to the research at King's College in 2009 that I mentioned. And however good your algorithms are, however good your technology is, it's only as good as the content that you read. So if, for example, you start reading fake news, what are you going to be sharing with people? So we wanted to ingest kind of high quality scholarly and academic literature. And at the time we were working with a few universities. So we asked them, we said, what content are you interested in? And, they shared their content list with us. And that's been one of the great things about working in this environment, is that people are so willing to share their knowledge and share their expertise. And so, we came at this from a technology point of view. And I mentioned before, my background is BT. I'm not a qualified librarian, and I've never worked in publishing. So I've really appreciated over the years the people who've answered the stupid questions that I've asked. And I've learned a lot, and I have much more to learn. So I'll be honest about that. But anyway, so we're working with libraries, and we still collaborate on all of our new developments, because actually the people who work with researchers on a daily basis are the people who can really help you understand the environment. And we started talking to publishers, and it was in October 2015 that I first met a publisher at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And I had a series of meetings set up, and I went off and I said, I'm Ruth Pickering from Yewno. And they said, who? And I'd say Yewno. And then they'd say, can you spell that? And people still say that to me today, by the way. I still spell you many people. So I explained that, and I explained AI, and then they're like, AI? Artificial intelligence. And you have to think this was, nearly 7 years ago. And then when I explained how the knowledge graph worked, and I explained how it took the full text, read the full text, and then ran these algorithms, extracted meaning in the form of concepts, etc., projected to knowledge graph, publishers would be sort of like, oh, actually, that could be really helpful. A lot of publishers said to me that they weren't happy with the existing indexing, and they felt that their content was being pushed down in certain search tools. And other publishers just said, I know I haven't got any keywords before 1970 or whatever, or I know I've only got 3 and I should have at least 20 or whatever. So I think all publishers and content owners and the people who write the articles, so the researcher in the first place, if you've written something, you want it to be found. And so I think that the whole industry really is supportive of helping to make their content discoverable. But up until kind of recent developments and rereading essentially the full text, I'm not sure that that's been possible. So when we work with publishers, it's the same arrangement that all of the major sort of library providers have and that Google has. So they give you the text for free, and you make it discoverable in your product, and you return it to them. So if somebody were to find licensed content in Yewno, we would send the search query back to the publisher to wherever they want it through the link resolver. So that's how it's kind of a virtuous circle. They get their content is found better in our product, and then they get the traffic back.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think it's interesting you say that not all content from publishers was indexed or indexed as fully as it might be. And they're motivated to work. You're absolutely right, aren't you? Publishers want to get their stuff read. So this sounds to me like an approach to that. And you've mentioned algorithms, and there's been a lot of talk about algorithms and bias and all those kind of things. So tell us a little bit more about that and how you deal with issues of bias and so on. And also, before you answer, I'm just reminding everybody that if they do want to ask any questions, we've got the Q&A option there. So do feel free to put your own questions into Q&A, and we'll pick those up in a moment. So sorry, Ruth, go on.
Yeah, no problem. So I was going to say, I think the place we should all really start off is where we are with traditional search today. And traditional search today is biased because it's almost entirely using the available metadata, and the metadata is lacking. It's as we said, it's not consistent, and it's missing a ton of keywords that were in that piece of content. So I think, with algorithms, people say that algorithms are written by humans and that humans might be biased, and that is true, they are. But you have to think about what is the business model of the person who wrote that algorithm and what are they trying to do? So there are many kind of free products on the market that are AI powered. And is a product really free? No, nothing's free. So if it's free to you, that means either they're pushing advertising, pretty annoying, or they're selling your data, or potentially they've sold their services to the person who owned the data and they're surfacing that content higher up the list. So from our point of view, our product is not free. It's a subscription product, and it's deliberately because we don't want to have that kind of bias. We don't want to be pushing higher up our list a particular content owner because they paid us. So that's kind of not how it works. So I think, when you are looking at products, everybody should be doing their due diligence, and they should be considering whether or not bias might be there, because it could be.
Actually, we've got a question right on that issue of algorithms. So rather than wait to the end, I think I'm going to put it to you now, Ruth. So do you face competitors who have competing algorithms focused on academic libraries? And what's proprietary? What's special about what you do?
Yeah, so I think if you were doing something and you didn't have competitors, then you should start to worry. So competition is good. And if no one copies you, then you maybe aren't doing something so great. So I think people are always mentioning to me sort of different products and things. And I always take a look. And I think foundationally, everyone's algorithms are going to be different, because that's kind of the basis of your kind of IP, essentially. So I think people are coming at it from a different angles. And I think our sort of USPs are our original sort of technology that we founded the company on, and our ability to read unstructured text and identify meaning, using our models. But I also think it's not a one-size-fits-all environment. So we're all different. We all research in different ways. Some people will walk away from this call and they will go back to a traditional search list and they love it and they're happy. Some people are not happy. We're not happy before, will not be happy after. They'll try something different. Maybe it's a knowledge graph visualization. Maybe it's something else. So I think, competition in markets is good. That's a personal belief. Not everyone would agree with me, but that's what I think. And so I'm sure there are lots of people who are doing something similar, whether they're sitting in a garage somewhere in Silicon Valley or in London or in Israel or somewhere else. And it's good that we all have these ideas and that we're all pushing for the boundaries.
And actually, on that, picking up something you mentioned earlier on about working with customers, you talked about how you work with them in terms of getting the different content in. But I'm assuming that you're working with customers to improve and your algorithms and the kind of results people get. What kind of partnership is there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think, when you work in sort of with algorithms and in technology, you're always investing in your R&D. And that's an ongoing thing. So I think in terms of the two parts of Yewno, there's the sort of content part. So we're always expanding the range of content sources that we ingest and continuing to grow that. And you're always working on your algorithmic approach. So we love, getting feedback. So we do focus groups ourselves. Some of our customers do focus groups and give us the feedback, which we also love. And we're always open to suggestions and recommendations, whether it's something to do with the UI or it's, a question or something that, people think might be useful in the future. And I think that collaboration is invaluable.
And tell me, it's another question that's come into the chat, actually, that as you mentioned, the existing ways of approaching the data through metadata and indexing, it's not that they're invalidated. What we're looking at is, I like that expression, huge amounts of getting meaning from huge amounts of unstructured data. Is there some kind of ability to cross over and work with both approaches? Would you be Could you ingest metadata, for example, or? Yeah,
I mean, I've been thinking about this. We've been thinking about this since the beginning. So Yewno doesn't replace the existing traditional search. People still need existing search tools, and so we've never been saying, we'll knock out a competitor, because there was no competitor. So you need to keep your existing search tool. And it's interesting over the few years talking to people about traditional search, because absolutely it's going to be here forever. That's not going away, that kind of list of results. And when you need to look for a specific item of text and the title, the author, whatever, that's the best way to find it, rather than through a knowledge graph. So I've been wondering about kind of what publishers have said to us, what librarians have said to us, and I do think there's a big opportunity to use the same concepts, the same data that we extract from the knowledge graph, that we can apply them back to individual content items to improve the metadata of content items. And I think probably, the publisher content is one angle, but I actually think the biggest advantage will be in the open access content sphere, because there are some brilliant open access sources. And if they were indexed better, they would surface better in all of the traditional environments. And I think that would be a huge benefit, particularly with sort of the budgetary constraints people are under.
And you've just made me think, actually. I've been doing some work with institutional repositories, and I mean, can you apply it to that? It's not a huge data set necessarily, but it might be globally. But is there opportunity to apply the Yewno approach to, if you like, those local data sets, the repository data sets?
Yeah, so the great thing about the technology is it can read any amount of data. The smallest repository we've ever done had 400 items. But yeah, so you could have 400 items of text. You could have 10 million items of text, but the technology can read that in exactly the same way and also give you a visualization of that text in the knowledge graph, or equally give you the semantic metadata if what you want to do is take all of that indexing and put it into your own search tool, update your MARC records or whatever, so that it becomes discoverable.
Right. That's right. So let's move on, because I think I want to now start to think about where you see the future going. What you've painted is, a great picture, huge amounts of unstructured data, getting meaning from it, the knowledge graph, visualizations of it, making relationships. So where do you see that future for AI and libraries going?
So I think that AI offers a lot, both for, the libraries and the people who, select the content and make it discoverable. And I think also from the researchers on the other side of the equation. So I think if you work in a library and you have these collections, you decide what you're going to buy, and you have maybe some local collections, and what you want is you want people to find those things. And I think one of the other challenges for libraries is, with the sort of advent of all of these kind of free other sites, people don't necessarily go to the library so much. So I think enhancing the kind of discovery through both the traditional tools and offering new tools, hopefully we can get more people back to the library to discover some of the really high quality content that they have. And I think that's one angle for libraries. So I think all the steps that people are making in terms of improving discovery, whether it's in their traditional environment or whether it's introducing something new, are valid. And I think from a research perspective, we did some research 5 years ago when we were just starting, testing out our prototype. And we gave students a question. We said, take a piece of research you've done where you submitted your paper and redo that in Yewno. And the idea was that you've submitted your paper, so you know everything you will know about that topic. And we said, see if you can find anything different or find any new content sources. And 9 out of 10 did. They found things that they didn't know, because the visualization had given them ideas that they hadn't come across. And they also found content sources that they had not previously found. So I think, it shows that you can get better utilization of your collections through, first of all, suggesting maybe non-obvious terms to the researcher. And secondly, because the full text indexing just surfaces documents that don't get surfaced when you only use the traditional metadata.
So I like that idea about getting ideas, actually. Obviously, I was doing some work with NHS, and there was a ward sister who was doing a master's, and what she wanted was ideas. So that true notion of discovery, isn't it? You mentioned earlier on that if you just want to find something, there's alternative routes if you've got all the details and you're just after that. So we're talking about, interesting, discovering things we might otherwise have missed, and getting insights perhaps that we wouldn't otherwise get. So is it empowering us in that way? Is that the benefit? And who do you see as the key beneficiaries? You talked about researchers, you talked about students. Is there a main direction, or do you think it's for everyone?
So one of the things that I've been told by librarians over the years, kind of repeatedly, is that students can't formulate good search queries because they don't know the terms. So I think definitely at that stage it's super helpful. And I think particularly, looking at times when people are forced to work remotely for whatever reason, and you can't go into a library and you can't ask somebody, the fact that you have something that can suggest to you, connections and terms and angles that you might like to explore is really, really useful. And I think, the other point you asked about, about inference. So I think the other thing about a knowledge graph is that it can infer in the same way that we as humans can infer. And that's a difference. You asked earlier about sort of visualization of a database versus a knowledge graph. So because of the millions of items of content that have been ingested, a knowledge graph, using its mathematical models, can say these two things are very similar. I can suggest to you that there might be a connection, even if a paper hasn't yet been published. So I think it's giving you those kind of two angles. And I think it also, in a very digital world, brings back a little bit of kind of serendipity into the research process, because you can't just go to a tool and say, well, I'll take page 1, I'll take the top 10, I'll get my grade. There's no number 1. You're looking at a graph. There's no, which is the first one? Where do you start? You have to lean in and you have to basically make a choice. It's not passive search.
That's really interesting. And I think that notion of serendipity will resonate with a lot of librarians, because really going back all those times of visiting a physical library, that was a mechanism, if you like, by which you browse the shelves, and there was that serendipity. I also love this idea of inferring things and having, well, I was going to say someone, it's not someone, an approach that's maybe shows me there might be a relationship, but there might not, but there's something that might be there. And I'm thinking, again, some work I did with some researchers who were looking for exactly that. What would be a good area for my research? I want to do something where there's a possibility of some positivity, but maybe not enough. I don't want something that everybody has researched. So I think that's quite imaginative, isn't it? That ability to give people a tool that can infer things, because we're used to library systems being here's the result kind of thing. Yeah, no, very, very interesting. Well, look, we've come to the end of it. We've done that. We've done 35 minutes, and we've had a couple of questions. Is there any concluding remarks that you feel? I mean, if I was to summarize, what I've got the message is huge amounts of unstructured data, a tool that can make sense of that, a tool that I'm excited about, that whole area of inferences, can do more than just give you results. And we've got this ability to do that realistically. I mean, you do charge for it. And I thought it was very interesting, the point you made about not being free, because that old cliche, if it's free, you are the product. So I think we talked about algorithms. So who do you think are the clients who use most successfully? What kind of exemplars do you think there are?
So I think, first of all, the kind of key foundation to this is, are you happy with what you're doing today or not? And if you're really happy, then great. But if you think there might be something better, if you're interested in continuing to evolve your ecosystem, I think the main thing for me is that language is not static, language evolves, and that content, we've talked about the kind of exponential increases in content. So I think those two things mean that, there is no such thing as standing still. If you're not moving forward, you're in fact going backwards, So, you can't just think, well, I'll push off a decision for 6 months. You're going backwards because everyone else or the world is moving forward, because the language has evolved, and whatever you're using, if it's static, has not changed. It has not absorbed all of those new things. So I think people who kind of are interested in, moving into a different domain, and it may feel uncomfortable because you're moving away from, the traditional world of sort of subject headings, but those things that were designed for when we all walked into a library or bookshelf, in a digital world where you can actually read the full text, they become less necessary. And there are different ways of approaching search. So it might be an uncomfortable journey initially, but I think, recognizing that the power of AI can actually transform. And I always think about it just from a personal level, looking back at being a student and how amazing it would have been for me to have had something like a tool like this, where I could have just, got not just to the document, but to the section of the document, and to overcome, the fragmentation of content and the volume of content.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice summation, actually. You just made me think. I interviewed a student in that project at Derby who was using, and he said his first reaction was, "What's this? This is so unlike anything I've used before, and I'm totally confused. And what is it?" And then within seconds, you're saying, "Wow, yeah. I've got it." So it's we do need to make leaps, don't we? And what's an intuitive system is often just what we've used in the past. So, well, look, thanks, Ruth. I'm going to stop the recording in a moment. Thanks to all the participants. We've got a great load of participants. I will be making the recording available and publishing it on Higher Education Library Technology, which is a wiki website that I manage. So once again, thanks, Ruth, so much for your time. It's great to use the technology that I can talk to you from Brentwood in Essex in England and to California. And thanks so much for your comments. So we're going to end there. I'm going to stop the record.